In my first video of this series about upsetting media, I talked about why commercial media bothers us so much, and how the prevalence of mass-produced media has permeated our culture, creating an augmented reality. In my second video, I tried to articulate the subtle distinction between the sensations of being triggered versus being offended. You can find both of those discussions in the video description. In this video, I will talk about ways of responding to commercial media when it upsets us and just grows altogether too wearisome. Being upset or offended is part of life. Quite often, those reactions are outside of our control. So it's important for us to learn how to respond to offensive or triggering material in positive ways. We don't want to discard or ignore or invalidate our emotions, but we also need ways of channeling our emotional responses into a force for personal growth. The first strategy of dealing with upsetting media is through education. I once listened to a lecture by the famous philosopher Noam Chomsky, and I thought he gave a very helpful piece of advice about seeing offense as an opportunity for education. I don't remember the original context because it was years ago, so you won't see a source in the description and I might not be telling the story right, but the point will be the same. Chomsky described a story about a college campus where some radical student group had invited a notoriously racist political influencer to speak on campus. Of course, the student body was up in arms about this guy showing up, but some other students hosted a rival event at the same time, and it was a panel discussion and open forum on issues of racism. They saw this offense as an opportunity for education, and were thus able to reach more people about important issues of racial justice. Seeing offense as an opportunity for productive conversation and education is one valid way of responding to hurtful media. Sometimes people find what I'm about to say peculiar, but I have actually received some of the most important education about serious issues pertaining to gender-based violence, sexism, and gender exploitation by reading feminist scholars of horror films. There are brilliant thinkers like Andrea Subasati and Alexandria West from the Faculty of Horror podcast and Rue Morgue magazine, or other influential scholars like Carol Clover, and these women analyze the ways that women are portrayed in horror films, both the positive and the negative, and they use that as an opportunity to discuss broader gender issues and the sociological factors contributing to those portrayals. They also do great film analysis in its own regard, but I see what they are doing as a very positive way of responding to upsetting commercial media. They are using it as an opportunity for educating people about broader, important sociological realities. To respond to offensive media with education, it can help to learn more about how media works. There are plenty of great free resources online. There's a crash course on media literacy right here on YouTube that can provide basic insights into things like advertisement. You can also go to your local library and rent a book about film criticism or music criticism to help gain some of the basic terminology to analyze these things. Or, another way that's fun, you can sign up for a free account on a website like academia.edu and search for articles about your favorite movies. This will help you learn how to analyze film, and you can see other examples of people using commercial media as a springboard for positive, constructive conversation about broader social topics. These methods will help you put your pain or offense into language, so you can talk about your feelings in a constructive way. And as Mr. Rogers always taught, anything human is mentionable, and anything mentionable is manageable. Another way of responding to upsetting media is to transform that discomfort into art. There are plenty of ways to do this, and I suspect you're creative enough to figure out some of your own, but I'll provide you with a couple of examples. The first approach is a type of subversive collage. In this method, one appropriates various instances of upsetting media, and then one stitches it together in a collage that showcases the trend of problematic material, or what type of ideology might be functioning within that material. And this can be a form of art, a form of collage. It can even be something as simple as a meme. A brilliant example of this type of subversive collage on a broader scale would be the art group Everything is Terrible, which you can find on YouTube. They take old VHS tapes and edit them in a way that showcases directly the type of ideology of the pre-internet culture that created us. In one of their 50-minute movies called Comedy Relief Zero, they create a brilliant montage of stand-up comedians who are not funny saying very terrible things, thus demonstrating the extreme forms of, for example, sexism and racism that exist within the comedy genre, and the ways that it's used simply for shock value without any real comedic value. Another mode of artistic response is through poetry. A quick Google search will show you lots of different ways to write poetry, which can be a healthy and beneficial hobby. But I'll give you an example of the kind of poetry that I like to create, specifically when it comes to processing my emotions. Dada poetry is a practice that I often use when someone says something that upsets me, or I encounter something within media that triggers me. First, create a graph on a piece of paper, filling each space of that graph with an individual word that you hear from media, or that was a phrase that was spoken to you that you found either triggering or offensive or otherwise upsetting. Next, cut out the words such that you have one small piece of paper for each word in a mixed up pile. Then, scramble the words together and pick words from that pile at random. You can choose to take several words at once and rearrange them as you wish, or you can make your poem be truly random and simply follow the order at which you draw the words. I find this poetic practice healing because it allows me to break apart the words and phrases that made me feel broken. And I feel as if I regain a sense of agency by changing those words into something beautiful. And finally, another artistic response is to simply create art. Draw pictures, create elaborate doodles. Your art doesn't have to be good, but one can find a sense of peace in working on an art project as a form of processing one's emotions. Ask yourself, how might you symbolically illustrate your pain? What vision of peace or comfort are you seeking? What would it look like for that which pained you to be destroyed, or perhaps transformed, or even redeemed? Answer these questions with art. Or, if you are more musically inclined, write a song about how you feel. Let go of the pressure of making things good. Just have fun. Make something that sounds terrible and messy and then call it avant-garde. Hit piano keys with your fist and scream. You can learn to reclaim your sense of agency through artistic expression. When it comes to dealing with upsetting media, another piece of advice I'd offer is to cultivate a life outside of commercial media. Over the pandemic last year, I had to spend a lot more time inside, which caused me to consume a lot more media and spend more hours on the internet. The digital aspect of our augmented reality began to overtake the material realm of everyday existence. Consequently, problematic elements within commercial media became all the more provoking for me because the digital realm was outspacing the rest of my life and presenting itself as a bigger threat than what I was used to. But as society has opened up and I've gotten back together with friends, I found that being around people who love and care about me truly does a lot to help me feel safe and cared for and less alone. Community groups, church groups, artistic subcultures, music venues, museums, hanging out with friends and family, going to the gym, creating art, going to your local comic book store and finding a group with whom to play Dungeons and Dragons. There are lots of options for rebuilding a life outside of the internet, and I think such an endeavor is worth the effort. Finally, when it comes to processing upsetting commercial media, I think there is a theological point as well. Speaking for myself as a Christian, I find a lot of comfort in reflecting upon things that upset me through the lens of Christ, quite often by meditating on the crucifixion in which, according to Christian tradition, God chooses to identify with human suffering in Christ, and through this suffering, God brings about redemption. For example, I think about a particularly upsetting instance of media in which, say, a character is mocked and derided over something about which I'm sensitive and perhaps directly relates to my most painful experiences in life. I might then meditate upon Christ being mocked and derided while on trial and after his condemnation by Pilate and while he was on the cross, as mentioned in the Gospels. Or, in the case of witnessing certain depictions of bodily trauma that I find triggering, or even hearing people make fun of such trauma, I meditate upon Christ's own bodily trauma. In doing so, my goal is not only to think, well, other people had it bad too, though there is a certain comfort in thinking that God empathizes with and understands my pain. However, I also try to think about how the mocking and bodily trauma do not get the last word. At the crucifixion, the world is saved through bodily trauma. From a Christian perspective, it was an event involving mocking, betrayal, abuse, bodily trauma that was appropriated or used or what have you by God to secure the future redemption of all creation. And the picture of the resurrection is a glimpse into what that type of future might look like when creation is fully redeemed, thus bringing an end to bodily trauma and mockery. Not only do I find such meditations beneficial for myself, but it inspires me to have compassion and empathy for others as well. If, at the cross of Christ, God enters into human suffering and even identifies with my own pain, how might God be entering into the suffering of others? How might I see the face of Christ in the cries of my neighbor? So that wraps up some of my thoughts about this topic of dealing with upsetting media, and I hope that you found these perspectives that I offered to be beneficial. Once again, I'm not a professional therapist. These are just examples drawn from my own experience. If you have your own ways of positively dealing with upsetting commercial media, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you don't mind sharing. But until next time, thank you so much for listening to this video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.